Welcome. This session is part of the 2024 Watershed Congress virtual program. The Watershed Congress is organized by the Delaware Riverkeeper Network in collaboration with many other organizations. My name is Robin Sperlino, and I'm a member of the Watershed Congress Organizing Committee, and am also your moderator for this session, Lawn Conversion in Pennsylvania, with Alyssa Kaiser. You can take it away, Alyssa. Thanks.
Well, thanks everyone for hopping on, and for those watching later, recorded. I am Alyssa Kaiser with DCNR Bureau of Forestry, based over in Harrisburg, but covering the southeast corner of Pennsylvania, working on lawn conversion and much more. So first, what is watershed forestry? And before we really dive into lawn conversion, I want to give a bit of a background about who I am, what my team is doing, and what we're doing across the state. So watershed forestry started in 2016 here at DCNR, expanding both in capacity and staff, really focused, or I guess I should say developed from the Bay watershed over in Harrisburg. Started just focusing on the Bay, and then we have expanded now to a statewide program for all of Pennsylvania. Our team is currently made up of 7 regional staff, which I am one of, and then we have 2 program coordinators and 1 program manager. We're focused on grant programs, providing technical assistance, building partnerships, and just bringing these practices to the ground across the state. These practices include riparian forest buffers, which is what our program started to focus on before 2016. And if anyone has questions about our riparian buffer program, I will definitely welcome them. And you can send me an email, which will be provided at the end of the presentation. But today we're really just going to be focusing on the second part of the program, which is the lawn conversion practices. So lawn conversion, what is this all about? When our program first started, we created a framework that really encapsulates everything that we wanted to accomplish. So our number one thing was reducing the amount of lawn that is across the state. And that can happen 2 ways. One, by planting a forest on that lawn, or by installing a meadow on that lawn. So our lawn conversion program is multifaceted, containing the forest aspect and the meadow aspect, which we'll go over. And then we really just wanted to build enthusiasm across the entire state, not only for the landowners that will have these projects done, but also for the partners that can make them happen, the funders that make it happen, and one of the largest hurdles, the contractors, having contractors that are interested in this natural landscape type of ecological restoration focused work, and of course the decision makers. And in our framework, we wanted to include just challenging the landscape paradigm that's out there. Having all of this just maintained turf grass and what it potentially could be if you open up your mind and have a creative lens to what your lawn could potentially look like. Some of our key strategies. So I won't get into this too much, but we went through and really wanted to focus on marketing, education, capacity building, partnership, and funding. And through all of these things, I think our program has really taken off the last few years, as we will talk about later with the demand that we have, especially in Southeast Pennsylvania. There's so much room for growth in this program, and I'm excited to see where it goes as we expand on all of these strategies. One fun one has always been education, coming and giving presentations like this, going and doing workshops, creating demo sites through workshops, and then going back and visiting those demo sites, the partnerships that we've been able to create across the entire state at this point, and then the funding mechanisms that continue to grow each year and with each grade cycle. So one of the largest partnerships that we have is our Lawn Conversion Advisory Committee, which formed right before the program itself launched. And that contains statewide partners that are interested in having some kind of say. So whether these are research groups or whether these are groups that are putting projects in. We have small individuals, we have larger organizations. There's a lot of different types of groups represented in this advisory committee. It's been very, very helpful for the direction that we wanted to take the program, and still meeting biannually now to tackle any challenges that we have and continue to develop lawn conversion across the entire state. Funding, obviously one of the largest components of our program, not only to distribute funding to organizations, but also to individual landowners, which we'll talk about later in the presentation. And then obviously actually getting these projects in the ground, planting the meadows, or seeding the meadows and planting the trees. And then technical assistance and training. So one of my largest parts of my job is just going out and providing technical assistance to partners and landowners, and training them and equipping them to actually put these projects in. So when we're talking about lawn conversion specifically, we're converting exactly what you're seeing on the screen here. Maintained turf grass that's continuously 8 inches or less throughout the year. Areas that have very limited invasives, noxious weeds. This can be private or public land. So think schools, think parks, think backyards, front yards, city common areas, anywhere where there's these large swaths of grass. So I challenge you to think for a second about your home and your backyard and your neighbors and what that looks like. And I would say that majority of us can agree that those are maintained and mowed areas. I'm picturing myself driving through rural areas even around here with just large swaths of maintained grass, and what that could potentially look like if we would reconsider what that could be. With open minds and creative minds, we can really make a lot happen, taking away that turf grass and putting in native plants. So here's a good demo slide of what exists now and what could exist. So we're really trying to convert that nice maintained mowed turf grass into something more beneficial. And I just want to point out that with the way our funding is currently written, we have to work with this sterile, maintained, mowed lawn that you're seeing on the left-hand side of the screen. We can't work in pastures or fallow fields or anything the way that it's written right now. We're trying to expand our program that we can start in more environments, but right now we're just limited to that maintained turf grass. When we look at these, many benefits through these conversions, and I'll go ahead and go through some of these exact benefits. So with our turf grass that's been mowed for many years, what we're seeing is the compacted soils. We're seeing shallow root systems from that turf grass, and with shallow root systems comes less infiltration, more pooling, more flooding downstream. And then the need from landowners to apply pesticide and fertilizer to keep it looking up to their standards. One of the many ongoing maintenance costs, and then continual mowing, which is then creating more carbon emissions from that. And then just the fact that it's a grass monocrop and it's an ecological dead zone where there's not anything passing through and finding home or shelter in that area. It's just a complete dead zone. When we convert it, we open up to many more benefits. We have deep root systems, which is improving the soil health. We have increased water infiltration. It's reducing the flooding. It's processing pollutants and nutrients. The longer term maintenance is more limited. You're only mowing a few times every 5 to 7 years. We're reducing carbon emissions from less maintenance. We're increasing carbon storage, And it can be a very beautiful area with blooms throughout the majority of the year, different textures, different heights, and it's providing habitat for wildlife and pollinators to stop in. That was kind of all of the ecological side of benefits, but there's also a lot of human values that provide benefits. So think about the beauty, the art, the opportunity for play, curiosity, learning and connecting to nature, not only later years, but also having these areas be learning and connection opportunities for the leaders of tomorrow. So instilling values in them related to nature and restoration and these type of projects, showing them the benefits at a young age to be able to build off of that in the future. So non-natives versus natives. You might have seen this slide before. It's gotten around the past few years, but it really displays the soil aspect and water infiltration to the native plants versus non-natives. So although there's so many benefits happening up above ground, a lot of benefits are down below too. So our native plant species to Southeast Pennsylvania have much, much deeper root systems. They're providing a lot more work down there. They're increasing the infiltration rates, limiting flooding. They're doing all kinds of great things. And here in this image, you can really see the depth change. So a lot of non-natives are only reaching 3 to 4 feet underground, while some of our natives can reach 10 plus feet, 15 plus feet underground. And then to take it back to a middle school level, our trophic levels, when we provide that base of the pyramid, the foundation of the plants, everything else comes with it. So if we provide a robust green leafy level for insects to feed on, the insects will come, and the more insects that come, the more birds that will come, the more predators that will come. We're really creating that whole pyramid of biomass by just providing the base level. So when we're thinking about our maintained turf grass that's out there right now, that's not providing much of anything for insects to come to. So the birds aren't coming, so the predators aren't coming. But if we provide a true rich habitat for the insects, then the birds will come and then predators will come. So by providing this, we're really helping the entire ecosystem from the ground up, if you will. Native plants. The impact of native plants is really great, and we've heard a lot about this. Native plants versus invasive versus noxious. In our programs, we're only planting native plants, plants that are adapted to this area. They've been here for long before us. They understand the climate, they have niche habitats, and they're able to thrive in this area already. And our native plants coincide with all the insects that were here long before us as well. So, for example, these native plants can be host plants for insects. Think of the monarch on milkweed. Think of, pictured here, the goldenrod gallfly on goldenrod. The entire life cycle happens on goldenrod. So if goldenrod's not present in the ecosystem, the goldenrod gallfly won't be present in the ecosystem. These native plants just need to be part of our landscape in Southeast Pennsylvania. And if they are here, everything will follow. So when these projects go in, you might hear, but the bugs are eating my plants. And I'll challenge and say, yes, that's awesome, just like they should. So these bugs that are eating the plants out in the projects that we're putting in are exactly what we want to see. The traditional gardens that you might be putting in, you might be heartbroken when you wake up one day and your hostas are destroyed. Because you put those there and you mulched around them and they're in your garden and you care about them so much. But these plants that we're putting out in our forests and our meadows, we're putting them there to do exactly that, to create the ecosystem that's going to have everybody present in it. So this is what we want to see. And that's one of the things that we really have to talk to landowners about when we're putting these projects in. Really the full circle of what we're trying to put in. We have to educate them on exactly how these projects go in and what they are going to look like. We're not so much doing gardening and landscaping rather than a complete ecological restoration of an area. Not only the bugs, but other unexpected guests. Some of the common concerns that we hear from landowners as these go in are ticks, wasps, hornets, mammals, and then what will my neighbors think, and what if the code enforcement officer comes around? All valid concerns, but all able to be handled. So for the ticks and the wasps, hornets, mammals, those types of things can be controlled, or at least helped to control by planting shorter stature plants along paths if you're planning to put them in. And what that's going to do is limit if there would be critters in your meadow. They're not going to brush up against you when you're walking. Think ticks. If you're not brushing up against any high grasses, then you wouldn't get ticks on you if you're walking on a short area. Mowing wider paths for easier access and not being able to get in there with any kind of ticks or anything. Putting up raptor posts around the meadow can also help control mammals if you're seeing anything like that. Giving the opportunity for some hawks to come in and help manage. And then neighbors, one of the biggest things you can do to make these projects more accepted by neighbors would be to provide cues for care, which we'll talk about when we get into the installing of the meadow. And then code enforcement officers. One of the biggest things that I've heard from landowners is do your research, have a solid education of what your code is for the area that you live in, and then have a plan. So when we put these projects in, we're always providing landowners with a planting plan that shows exactly who's doing what and when and how it will be cared for. And that kind of just justifies that we do know what we're doing here and we're following the rules, and it's intentional what we're doing. And by just providing that planting plan when someone asks you, it goes a great way to show that that this is intentional and it's not being left unkept. And then you're kind of open up the conversation to talk about the benefits and things that you've seen there, and it kind of really helps the whoever's concerned about it kind of buy into what's going on there. So I'll talk about planting a forest first, and then we'll dive into the meadow. So when you're converting this maintained turf grass to a forest specifically, our best management practice specs are for an urban forest. And what that's going to do is have all native trees and shrubs to create a new forest. So when we're putting these projects in, the maintenance is a little bit lighter than what you would see if we would convert this area to a meadow. After 5 years, these projects are pretty much set. They still need to be checked on, but really just 5 years, and you can kind of walk away and let these forests grow up and naturally succeed. After a while, they'll be able to regenerate themselves as long as you're not mowing through it, which the goal of the program is to stop mowing. So when you get to the point that you're not mowing anymore, these forests should be able to regenerate themselves. They're going to grow up and have canopy closure. So we're planting at a rate of approximately 175 stems per acre, which will then encourage canopy closure at full growth. And usually we're seeing our spacing a little bit dependent on how large the mower deck is that's going to cover this area. But 10 by 10 or 15 by 15 is pretty typical. And just to emphasize that we're putting trees and shrubs in these forest plantings. And we're choosing anywhere between 15 and 20, based on the size of the project, anywhere between 15 and 20 different species. And that's just for diversity and resilience for the future. So forest timeline, just to kind of give you a general overview of what a timeline for a planting might look like. Say we are shooting to have the planting go in 2025. You would want to connect with someone that can potentially provide funding as soon as possible, and then spend a good amount of time planning your project. You're going to want to go out to the site and see what's happening, see what species are around, see how it's currently being cared for. The planning of the project does not need to be rushed by any means. It's best to truly plan and prepare for the project before it goes in. So that might look like summer and fall of 24, and then come either the fall or the spring of 24 or 5, we'll prepare the site. When it comes to planting a forest, the site preparation is not very demanding at all. If it's maintaining turf grass, it should just be continued to be mowed, therefore continuing to make it eligible, and restricting any invasives from starting to take over, especially woody invasives. The planting would then go in the spring of 25, and those first 5 years are going to be what we call establishment. So that's going to look like frequent visits, and we'll talk about this in a bit, but just really letting that forest establish. And then from 2030 and beyond, that forest can be checked on regularly, but that's going to be able to just take off and grow up and have very limited maintenance. So when we're talking about planting, I'm sure most of us on this call has planted before, but I've already talked a little bit about the site preparation, which is just going to be control competing plants, which is pretty easy because you're just fighting turf grass. And then laying out the planting before you plant it. So you're going to want to base that on the mower deck. And then if the landowner has any considerations, like I just had a planting that I did last week where they wanted to leave an area wide enough for a tractor to come through because it was the access point to a back field. So we had to make sure that that's going to be laid out appropriately. So any other considerations that might be site specific, including that in your layout. And then planting. So as far as stock, for our project specifically, for restoration, we're using restoration grade stock, which is going to be either bare root or smaller containerized seedlings. So the bare root is great because it's not as expensive, though we will usually only plant those in the spring. And then the containerized we'll plant in spring or fall. They are a little bit more costly, but they do have a higher survival rate for the early years. So they're preferred for sure for our projects. If you're not sure the difference between bare root and containerized, they're in the center of the screen. You'll see the bare root seedling does not have any soil when it's coming out and being planted, whereas the containerized seedling is already in a soil medium. So planting itself, you're gonna dig your hole wide enough that your roots can easily fit in there. The roots should just be facing down. You don't want any of them to J-hook up and be facing in the up direction. You want them all to be facing down. Once they're all facing down, you kind of just scooch a little dirt over them to kind of keep where all of those roots naturally fall into place in those areas. And then you want to make sure you just plant it at the correct height. So you don't want it to be too high that any roots are exposed, but you don't want it to be too low that any of the stem is covered by the dirt once you fill the hole in. And that's just going to have a higher success rate. So oftentimes if you're leading volunteer plantings, I always recommend that you do a demo of planting a tree where everyone can watch, especially if it's their first, second, or third time, to make sure that these are planted correctly. All of our contractors have done this before, so we trust them, but with volunteers, when it's your first or second time doing something, it can definitely be tough, and you want to make sure it's done right, because if you have a volunteer go out and plant 20 trees all too deep in the soil, your survivability for that site significantly goes down. So making sure that they're going in correctly the first time around is super important. So these upland plantings, what exactly are they going to have in them? One of the first things we'll do is check out all the wood lots around the area and kind of see what species are thriving, what's doing really well, or what can we include to create more biodiversity in the area. Sometimes we'll do a soil test to kind of figure out exactly what's going on there. So what would thrive and work well in the conditions that are there. We'll usually do anywhere between usually 30-70 shrub to tree ratio. And then I listed just a few species that we'll include in our upland forest here. Think oaks, hop hornbeam, aspen sumac, white pine, and then some of the black walnuts, black locust, crab apples, those types of junkier trees, if you will. And then if there's areas that are, even though it's an upland planting in turf or current turf grass, if there's areas that lie wet, then we can put some more riparian focused species in there. But really making sure that we're putting the right plant in the right place. These species lists are very different than species lists that we would put in for a riparian buffer. So the maintenance aspect. We talked a little bit about the establishment, that first 5 years, and then long term. So that was like the 2030 and beyond in my example. The establishment period, so first 5 years, really focused on straightening and removing the tree shelters as needed, and then removing the bird nets. So you can see in this image that we have the oak stakes and the plastic tubes protecting this planting. And then hard to see in the photo, but a bird net goes over top of each one of these shelters. And that is kind of just a little netting that still has a hole about the size of a $50 at the top of it. And what that does is protects any birds that would perch on top of the shelter from falling into the tree shelter, because that's not good for the bird, not good for the plant that's trying to grow inside there. So those nets help in that aspect. So as the tree grows up, what we've seen happen in the past is when the seedlings get to be that height, sometimes they can get tangled in that bird net, which is not good for the sapling at that point. So taking off those bird nets before the sapling gets up to the height of the tube is definitely essential. And that sometimes when the species are faster growing can look like going out every month and making sure that it's not getting too close to the bird nets. And then of course, controlling any invasive or competing plants that would come up. You gotta get in there and make sure that there's nothing binding up the saplings and starting to strangle them. Making sure that there's not too much grass growing in the base of the shelter that would invite voles in or trap moisture in there that might lead to any kind of mold or fungus growing in there. And then we'd encourage for the first 5 years to mow between the rows of these trees. It's not necessary, but it is necessary in all cases to keep 3 feet around the base of each shelter, mowed down to the typical height of a mower deck. And what that does is keep the voles away and allows that sapling to really thrive. So if you're not mowing the whole area in between all of the rows, at a bare minimum, we need to keep 3-foot radius around each of the shelters mowed down. And then, of course, in those first 5 years, going in and marking any plants that need to be replanted, and then going back in the spring or the fall to do that replant. For our project specifically, we like to see 70% survival rate. That's kind of what our goal is. If it dips below that, then we'll go back in. And it's always helpful when you're going in to do a replant. to kind of, if possible, to mark down what species had the highest mortality rate, because then you aren't really going to focus on putting those back in the planting. If all of the sumacs died, then we're not going to put any more sumacs in. We're going to try other species that are doing well, or try a new species to increase the diversity. After those 5 years, some of the trees will be up out of the shelters. Some of them will not, though. Some of the oaks are very slow growing, and those won't pop up out of the shelters until closer to year 8 or 10, depending on the site. But by year 5, we usually have a bunch coming up out. Think tulip poplars. Tulip poplars I've seen come up out of the tubes in 2 growing seasons, spring and fall, and they're up and out. And so when at the top of the shelter, there's a 2-thumb rule. Once you can no longer fit your 2 thumbs in the top of the shelter, then that shelter is able to come off. Recently, though, I've started to encourage people to keep those shelters on even when they start to get a little bit tight. And that the reasoning behind that is buck rub. So if you know that there's high deer pressure in that area, if you take that shelter off, it is much more inviting for buck rub to come in. And what that is, for those of you that don't know, that's when the deer that have antlers, right before their mating season starts, they like to go and get velvet off of their antlers. So they're rubbing up against young saplings, not older trees, young saplings specifically. And without trying, they're actually really damaging the tree and sometimes actually completely killing the tree, essentially girdling it and getting enough damage around the entire tree that it will girdle and kill it. So by keeping that shelter on, even if it's a little bit snug, it might be better for the tree in high pressure areas. And the shelters are specifically designed that they have a perforation down the side of them, that if it truly gets too tight, it will break open. So it wouldn't be a difficulty that the shelter itself would girdle or strangle the tree. That would break open and the tree would be able to grow without being harmed at all by the shelter. Long-term maintenance. So after 5 years, if there's any tree shelters that are still out there, checking on them as needed, expecting mortality as the canopy closes. And at this point, we should stop mowing. We should not need to mow it all anymore. We can let that area go. And then with letting that area go, with no mow, keeping an eye on controlling invasive plants that come up. So that might look like manual maintenance, or that might look like going in with herbicide and controlling some invasives. But during these long-term maintenance times, we need to go in and make sure that the newly established forest is not being threatened by any kind of invasive plants. And with that, I will transition to the meadow aspect. So talking specifically about meadows, which is officially labeled as conservation landscaping. These meadows are perennial native wildflowers and grasses. Sometimes it's a little bit of a shock when I'm talking to landowners that we actually include grasses in these plantings rather than just flowers, just blooms, because I think that there's just a misconception that when people think about meadows, they think about only flowers, which there are pollinator meadows that only really have native wildflowers in them. But as far as our practices go, we always encourage native grasses in our meadows as well. So these meadows are maintained to arrest succession. They're always native, desired species, so we're not putting anything in there that we don't want in there. They have considerably more long-term maintenance than what I discussed in the planting of forests. And they are planted as one large plot, either by broadcast seeding or no-till drill, which I will get into. So as far as our meadow planting goes, I already mentioned that we're starting with a sterile lawn site, the maintained turf grass. We're planting with intention and we're planning thoroughly. We're removing the turf grass, and remove might not be the most accurate word. Sometimes we're just killing off the turf grass too. And then we're letting the plants naturally fill in the gaps. We're spreading the seed. We're picking the right plant, so the right seed mix. And then during the establishment, we're nudging these meadows along if they need. Things that we're not doing with our meadow restoration. This doesn't necessarily mean they aren't correct for meadow restoration, but just things that DCNR can't do. We're not starting with a failed conversion. So maybe a landowner tried to start a meadow and it just got filled with invasives, or fallow field pastures, some of the things we already mentioned. Things that grow wild. So maybe an area that was just a no-mow area for a bit and kind of got crazy. We can't work there. We can't overseed into just turf grass without controlling it. We're not doing any kind of landscaping. So think like a garden bed with mulch around plants. We can't do that. We're not planting plugs unless it's site specific and the site needs plugs. We're strictly starting with a seed mix. Using non-natives, we're obviously not doing that. We're not trying to amend any soils, and we're not going through and watering these meadows. If they're done correctly, if the right species are put in there, they're going to be able to thrive in the current soil conditions and the current climate. And then we're not going to over manage these plantings. We want to step back and kind of watch them take off for the first few years. And then if they need any help along the way, then we're going in and making that be a successful meadow install. So the timeline of these meadows is, so if you're planning for a spring timeline, we are going to connect you with an eligible grant. We're going to plan your project, site preparation in 2025, and then seeding, which seeding can be done in the spring or the fall, pros and cons to each of those. And then the establishment period is going to be the first 3 years, and then maintenance is going to be any time on. Robin, I'm just checking the time. I'm going to have to speed up here a bit and go through these. All right, so step 1, so getting connected. If you need help getting connected at all, I'm a great starting spot for this. Reach out to me and I can help you either directly with DCNR or point you to a partnership that we have to get you going on this. Usually the nonprofits are the one that are receiving the funding and getting these projects in the ground, which is awesome. We're going to talk about funding in a little bit here. When we're planning our projects, we're really thoughtful about this. We want to make sure that we plan correctly to be able to have a successful project. So here you can see a design that is a rough design of a planting that happened at a church over here in Cumberland County. So we included paths in this, cues to care. The seed mix was tweaked a little bit to fit the church's desires. And then we talked about the prep and the planting methods, the timeline for who was going to be doing what and when, and then fun things like signage and bird boxes, educational little works about it for that church. So really taking the time to plan the project is super important. I mentioned briefly the cues to care. Here are some pictures that kind of talk about the cues to care. So you can see that mowed edges definitely make it look more visually appealing. Sometimes a rock border helps, sometimes a fence helps. But these are all things that kind of show like, hey, we care about this. We did this on purpose. We're still maintaining around it, but the meadow itself looks really appealing. These go a long way in helping convince neighbors that this area is kept and intentional. So choosing your seed mix is super important. Thinking about things like the soil needs to be considered, level of sun that's available, the climate, And then things like the bloom period, the colors that you want to see, drifts that are found through it. This image is a very vast meadow. Not all of our projects are this large, but when they're more large like this, you have a little bit more room to play and kind of plan some of those drifts and colors sequences throughout the meadow. But here is an example of a seed mix. So you can kind of see what that looks like. They'll have the scientific name and the common name, and then the percent of seed that's actually in that mix. Oftentimes you can work with these companies to kind of tailor these seed mixes to exactly what you want. So here you can see this is a mesic to dry native pollinator mix. So this is going to be more focused on flowers that are blooming, that are super adapt to the pollinators, and then in a mesic to dry condition. So preparing the site. So removing the turf cover. This can look like herbicide applications to kill the existing turf, or this can look like organic methods, which I'll cover on the next slide. And then exposing the soil. So if you're doing a broadcast seeding, the turf residue needs to be removed. Whereas if you're using a no-till seed drill, you can just leave that residue there and seed over top of it. So you can see that there's proper safety going on in this photo. The area is flagged out, and that's being applied with herbicide. If you want to take an organic approach, I definitely would point you towards Xerxes site. They have an organic site preparation for wildflower establishment that is super helpful. It covers a bunch of different topics like solarization, sheet mulching, sun removal, and some other cropping. As far as our program goes, these tend to take much longer to prepare the site and can be more costly. So we are only doing these sites on sites specifically that either desired by the landowner or based on site conditions that require an organics preparation. That's when we're using these. Typically our projects are controlled with a herbicide. Here's a photo of a site that was just sprayed. So this was 17 days before the seeding. You can see that the turf grass is majority of it is killed off and ready to be seeded. This is at a retirement home, Pleasant View. It was a Pleasant View meadow. If you are broadcast seeding, then you need to prepare the seed mix. This is where you're tilling. So you need to till to expose the soil. You can see these fine folks on the screen have that soil tilled up. They've got buckets with their seed mix in it, and they're walking in a line across the entire site, and this is broadcast seeding. So taking a handful and throwing it on top of the soil to work that seed into the soil, and then covering it with a weed-free straw. So this is obviously more labor intensive than the no-till seed drill, which you'll see on this screen. So the site's already been prepped here. This has not been tilled. This area is going to be run over by the tractor that you see in the photo that has the no-till seed drill attached to it. That's going to mix the native seeds together and distribute them into the turf residue, plugging it down into the soil to take seed from there. And then you still will cover this in a weed-free straw over the site. Sometimes they skip this if the thatch is really thick and they feel like the seed really went down in, then you don't really need it because that turf residue kind of acts as the covering. And then the establishment year. So year 1 and year 2, patience, patience, patience. The meadow needs to take time to fill in and kind of really find the species find their niche. It is important though to have an establishment mowing. So as soon as the first growing season, when the plants get up to about 15 inches, then we're going to knock them back down to 8 or 10. So what that's going to do is get rid of any of the undesirable annual plants that are that still have seed in that area. If any spot herbicide applications are necessary, we'll go ahead and do that in year 1 and 2. And we don't encourage anybody to go in and pull any plants that they think might be invasive because it is very, very hard to identify plants when they are just germinating. So we don't want you to accidentally pull something that was intentionally put in there. Here, back to our example, you can see the meadow is 42 days after seeding and it's filling in. There's still gaps, but everything is starting to germinate and come up. You can see the exact rows where the no-till seed drill ran over the soil there. So it's starting to take off, and then getting into maintenance. We want this area to really take off and grow at its own rate. So we don't want to mow these sites annually, like we were doing with the turf grass. Well, we were doing much more with the turf grass. We encourage 3 to 5 year rotations to go through and mow. And when we say mow, we're still up at 8 to 10. So it needs to be a special higher deck mower. It can't be your everyday push mower. And then spot herbicide applications as necessary. If invasives start to come in, going in and controlling those areas. And that's just to not let any kind of invasives take over these meadows. So back to our site example here. This is 400 days after the seeding. You can see that it's very filled in, very limited exposed soil at this point. This is very brown-eyed Susan heavy, this meadow. They must have really liked it there. When species start to dominate our meadows, we'll go through and mow down different areas, maybe paths and drifts. We can overseed those areas then, or sometimes by just mowing it at a different point in the year, it allows other species to germinate and we get a little bit more diversity. Here are some more angles of that Pleasant View meadow. Very successful. The residents loved this. I'm sure they still are loving it. I haven't been out there for a few years, but they love looking out over this meadow. And then these are just other meadows to kind of open up your mind to what these could possibly look like. And then I'm going to go through quickly some of our funding, our resources, and our pipeline, and then wrap this up in the next few minutes here and open it up to questions. So here is our map of all the staff I was talking about. So you can see down in the southeastern corner, that gray area is currently my area, but we're broken up all over the state. Exciting news is that we just got funding to actually break the southeast corner in half because the demand is so high in the southeast that I was able to secure funding to break my region in half and hire new folk for specifically more of the Delaware side of the region. But so that will be, I'll have York, Lebanon, Lancaster, Chester, and then Delaware and Philly. And the new staff member will have Berks, Bucks, Montgomery, Lehigh, and Northampton. Some funding opportunities. So I definitely am pushing people towards the C2P2, which is the grant that DCNR runs annually. It's the Community and Watershed Forestry Grant, where local governments, 501c3s, and educational institutions can apply. It's a $50,000 minimum ask at 20% match. 5% time can be used for administration. And then the whole project is covered as far as staff time, outreach, planting, planning, and post-planting establishment care are all eligible expenses. The deadline for this is coming up. This year's deadline is coming up in 3 weeks now. No, it might be even closer than 3 weeks. April the 4th, so soon. So you probably won't be able to get anything in this year, but if you want to chat about putting an application in next year, I can definitely do that. This is the easiest way to receive funding through DCNR for these projects. You can also look into NIFLA. They have various programs that can support this kind of work. I know that the conservation districts in Southeast PA are already very aware of the grant that PACD has. They're distributing funds for the lawn conversion practices. And then the direct contracting through the regional specialists. So that would be through me. I have my own small allocation each year that I can get these projects funded. And then on the screen right now is what the requirements for that. So it is statewide, but focusing in my region, It's a 5-year landowner agreement, starting with maintained turf grass. We like to see at least half an acre. And I can work with anyone. I can work with private or public land. So nonprofits, churches, schools, landowners, a group of landowners, HOAs, anyone that has shovel-ready projects that can go in. I'm working with them. I currently have a wait list that is very long, but when I get large grants, the wait list dramatically jumps up. So I am applying to grants constantly to try to keep the funding coming in where I can distribute it to Southeast PA, and I'm sure there will only be more coming in when I have a staff member to help cover this southeast corner of Pennsylvania. So if you are interested in being on the wait list, definitely send me an email and I can get you on the wait list. Right now, I would say we have probably a 3-year waiting period, but I promise that it is going to be worth it. And there's times where I'm able to hand projects over to partners in the area or come up with funding to be able to make these projects go in. So definitely encourage you to reach out and get on that wait list sooner rather than later. Also want you guys to consider having landowners be able to go ahead and just fund these projects on their own. I can provide all the technical assistance leading up to putting these projects in, whether that's businesses or individual landowners, and encouraging municipalities to budget for these projects. And then if there's other local options that are in your area, I would love to know about them to spread the word and encourage more of these projects going in. I always have people reaching out and asking for funding. So if there's more out there that I don't know about, please let me know and I will make sure that all of the great landowners that I have on my waiting list find funding available for their projects. Some of our resources, we have, like I said, the technical assistance, both with myself and partnering organizations. And I want to highlight our contractor list. We have our state's contractor list, which is the invitation to qualify for ecological restoration. So if you know any contractors that are out there doing great things that want to be placed on our contractor list, our official state's list, please let me know. I would love to help them walk through the process to get approved and put on this list. These are the contractors that are bidding on all the projects for the state's ecological work. All qualified, all great organizations doing great things. Would love to get more on there, especially from the southeast corner. There's a lot of certification programs out there. So Master Watershed Steward Program has a watershed-friendly property. Think about the stormwater management programs going on, yard certifications like the Monarch Way Station. There's a bunch of them out there that these sites would be eligible for. And then just one quick slide here about things that DCNR is working on in our pipeline. We have a weed ordinance guidance that we're working on developing that we can then provide for people that are trying to redo their weed ordinance to have the language to be able to fit these projects in. We're also working with Penn State on an MS4 incentive for these practices. We're always working on outreach resources, creating signage to be able to go along with our projects. And very exciting is our DIY meadow kit, which is making strides in the last few months, where we can actually hand over all of the technical resource and seed to be able to hand to a landowner and be able to have them put in smaller sized meadows in their backyards. And then always working on expanding our list of demonstration sites to have potential project applicants go and check out to see what these projects are all about. And with that, I will end and open it up to any questions that may have come in.
Well, thank you so much, Alyssa. That was a fabulous program. Faith Zerb has sent us in a question. And Faith, if you're still available to unmute yourself, why don't you ask your questions, because it's a very site-specific situation that you're talking about.
Hi, thank you. Thank you so much, Alyssa. This was really interesting. You did answer the question about Southeast contractors, I believe. I know a couple of us are on the call, Jamie Anderson and Bonnie. We're working on some projects in the Upper Darby area. So we'll look for that list of contractors because we are trying to find, landscapers that are more, well-versed in natives. But I think the question to you maybe that's better to ask is, our specific project is in a really highly dense community in Upper Darby, lots of row homes with very small plots. And we're doing rain barrels and other things related to it, but there is a line item in there for 25 river-friendly gardens. And we're going out on site visits this week, but one of the things we're talking about doing is strips or like a local community block, if we can get several landowners versus just very small plots. But I'm wondering if you know of, a lot of your photos, they're much larger plots. And I know this program is also at more than a half acre, but I'm wondering if you have any experts that you think we should be tapping into, or landscapers specifically, knowing that these are tinier dense communities versus these vast, lawn areas.
Yeah, it's a great question. Definitely trickier to get contractors on board when you have smaller broken up projects, which I'm sure you can imagine. There are contractors out there, though, that I've found that want those small projects. So I know specifically one that's based in Lancaster, so a bit away from the Upper Darby. But that's exactly what he wants because he's all organic. So he thrives in those smaller, broken up sections that are more managed, like a garden rather than a giant, vast meadow. I can send you that contact to the one in Lancaster and see if he's interested in picking up the projects of that size. But other than that, I don't know of anyone specifically that's working in these smaller scales. But I will say that for the DCNR community and watershed C2P2 grants, as well as the direct contracting through myself, we will work with you if the project total adds up to half an acre. So even if those sites are only like 0.1, if you can combine them enough to have them be competitive as far as funding goes, then we will still work with them. It doesn't have to be, it can be many, many small sites and still be a competitive application. Does that answer your question, Faith?
Yes, thank you so much, Alyssa. Appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely.
I have a quick question.
Yeah.
You have a list of the demo sites available at the DCNR website. Is that how I would find that?
It is not on the DCNR website. I just have that saved as a document, and they are all on not private, on public land. So you would be able to access them. I can definitely send those to you, Robin.
Oh, that would be great. I have another one. Do you deal with Japanese knotweed as well and fighting some of these invasive species?
Japanese knotweed, usually not on the lawn conversion sites. On the riparian buffer sites, yes, absolutely. And that one is very, very tough. On the lawn conversion ones, I usually see the Japanese stiltgrass, which is also a tough one. The knotweed I know has been controlled mainly by chemical, by the herbicide, to be able to open up that area. And then it's going back for years to control it again. It's a tough one because every time that it floods, it's reseeding in all those same areas.
Devastating in some places along the Brandywine Creek that I drive by.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, I think it's about time to wrap up our session, and I want to thank you again, Alyssa, for your wonderful presentation, taking the time to share your expertise and knowledge in converting turf grass into wildflower meadows and forests. And I hope everybody will visit the virtual exhibit hall that we have on the Watershed Congress website for more information about the event supporters, opportunities to connect, and resources for your work. Thank you so much and enjoy your afternoon.